Excellent. Right, hello, welcome everybody to this webinar on Strive for Five. My name is Stella Jones and I'm the Director of Townend Research School. And I'm currently the primary content lead for the Research School Network, but that's a 2-year role, which unfortunately I'm reluctantly handing back in September. So welcome to everybody who made it along tonight. So as I said, we are a research school, just a real brief intro, part of the 33 other research schools that make up the Research School Network. And you can see there that we're spread out all across England. So please do get in touch with your local one find them via the website that I shared in the chat before, because they've always got things on offer and often free things as well. So the role of the Research School Network is to provide on-the-ground support to settings to make better use of evidence to inform teaching and learning and to really make a difference for those settings, especially those serving communities with high levels of socio-economic disadvantage. So our job as a research school is to do what it says on the screen there. So we work with and for the Education Endowment Foundation, the EEF, to support pupils to fulfil their primary objective, which is to improve academic outcomes for disadvantaged pupils from age 2 all the way up to 19. So they do this by supporting the use of evidence across the education system. So they basically fund the Research School Network. And then just to flag up a few sort of free resources that are available to you. As a network, we've collaborated to create a collection of videos that capture practitioner reflections, but more importantly, actual footage from within the classroom. So they cover themes from maths to literacy to metacognition. So there's loads on there, as you can see. They can be a helpful watch if you're considering implementing something similar. They offer pause points and then sort of link blogs and further reading. So, they're great for professional growth. And our one next year is going to be on Strive for Five. And hopefully, I'm just looking at her on the video call. There's somebody on the call, Nat, who is going to be recording that in her nursery setting for us. So that should be available sort of next year. So something else you might find useful that I'm sure you're all aware of is the Early Years Toolkit and the Evidence Store. So there's a whole shop front that you can see there that deals with all things communication and language, and it has sub-elements that you can see there. So each element presents the evidence, some teaching techniques, and most importantly, amazing video clips of real practitioners delivering to real children. They really are invaluable, well, I think they are. So for example, if you click in the teaching and modelling language category, and if you scroll right down to the bottom of the web page, there are sequences of videos such as these using Play-Doh as the stimulus, some here on retelling stories, and then this one on oral storytelling. So people often miss these videos because they're right at the bottom of the page. So I hope you'll agree that they are really useful, and they're actually super short as well, so they don't take up too much time to watch. Interactive reading is a big part, and I will sort of touch on this towards the end of today. It supports literacy and communication. It's when adults strategically prompt children to engage with text, with images, to have those discussions. It fosters turn taking and those serve and return interactions that we're going to look at all the way through the session tonight. You can use Strive for Five alongside interactive reading. And there's also a free recording of me doing a session on interactive reading back in May last year on our YouTube channel. Right, that's enough of that. So this is what we're going to cover today. I'll just let you read. And then just to sort of draw your attention to these EEF guidance reports. So amongst all the other things that I've mentioned, these are free to download as well. We're going to look really briefly at the Preparing for Literacy one now. So each report starts with a summary of recommendations that you can see there. Some people sometimes fall in the trap of just stopping there on that sort of front page and the summary page. But to dig deep beneath the summary, you need to go to the relevant page, and there's loads of extra information, insights, solutions offered for that recommendation. So, as I said, this is preparing for literacy. It's aimed at early years practitioners. And recommendation one emphasises the importance of high quality interactions between adults and children. And it's often described as talking with children rather than merely to children. So a strong focus on communication and language benefits all children, with studies showing particular advantages for those from disadvantaged backgrounds. So for more details, you can refer to the full guidance report, which you can find on the EEF's website. So the sort of cognitive science bit now. So a significant study in 2018 that you can see there on the top left provided really compelling evidence for the profound impact of conversational turns on both children's language development and actually the very structure and function of their brains. So the researchers used innovative methods, including sort of day-long audio recordings, which they then analysed with language environmental analysis, LENA for short, technology, and also MRI scans. And the researchers observed that more conversational turns correlated with greater brain activation in the key language processing regions. These rich interactions also led to stronger white matter connectivity in the brain in language-related brain areas, which indicates more efficient communication pathways have been built. So this research underscored that the quality of language interaction, specifically the dynamic of conversational turns, is more critical than just the sheer quantity of words that a child hears, and it actively shapes their brain. So I love this diagram. So a follow-up study that you could see before at the bottom by the same people, similar people, built upon these findings. So just let somebody in. So they directly investigated neuroplasticity in response to interventions that were designed to enhance family language environments. And neuroplasticity is like our human superpower. It allows the brain to change, to adapt, and to rewire itself for new cognitive activities. So both studies show that back and forth conversations actually led to measurable brain growth in language areas, proving that encouraging these interactions physically helps children's language develop. So conversations actually grow brain power. And then just in summary, some of the headlines from these reports. So it wasn't just the number of words that children heard that mattered, it was the number of back and forth interactions, conversational turns, that best predicted activation and development in the Broca's area, which is a brain region critical for language and speech. Children who experienced more frequent serve and return conversations showed greater language abilities, which included vocabulary, grammar, and comprehension. And then the MRI scans revealed that children exposed to more conversational turns had greater surface area in a part of the brain which is involved in language processing. Two more findings. So the study emphasised that interactive, responsive communication, so even quite brief exchanges, has a far greater developmental impact than just passively hearing lots of words. And then the findings align with the idea that language-rich, interactive environments are crucial for young children's development. So the study also suggests actionable insights for parents and educators, such as focusing on conversational engagement rather than merely increasing word exposure. So encouraging interactive talk using a framework like the Strive for Five can support both language development and brain growth in the early years. And we'll look right at the end about how parents can support with Strive for Five too. So obviously, a conversation will look very different with much younger children. So with infants, it might be taking turns to exchange giggles or coos. With toddlers, it might be repeating and expanding on their sentences. With older children, it might be asking who, what, where, when, how questions. Either way, it seems to be the interaction that best supports children's language skills and the underlying neural development. So I've got a lovely 1-minute video courtesy of the man that you can see there on Twitter. And he's got loads of these. I follow him and it just always makes me smile. It's lovely. So this offers an excellent opportunity to observe how babies can actually hold a conversation and take part in a conversation even without having actual words. And I'm sure you've all seen it. The video went viral recently. And as you watch, I just invite you to pay attention to the features that you can see down the side there, features that highlight the bright moments for growing brains. And I'll come on to that next. So I hope you can all hear this. It's always the tech.
No, okay. Why didn't you ever want to go to sleep? You've got energy. You've got I've got your teddy, and then you started pushing on. How did it go? I changed to them. I know that's what you wanted to do. But we've had a nice day together, and then you're pushing off now. I'm sure but why? Yeah. But he's going to see your baby. They put you in a baby, so you're meant to listen to what I'm saying. I was controlling it. But you're meant to be going to sleep because you're the baby.
So I'm sure you've all seen that, and I'm sure you noticed that the infant's engagement, turn taking, the responsive vocalizations, and these are all crucial indicators of early communication development. So just as an interesting aside, you might also pick up on how the rhythm and intonation of the baby's vocalizations already mirror the accent of the caregiver, and babies actually start developing accents even before they speak. And again, they mirror the rhythm and intonation of the language that they hear daily. This actually begins in the 3rd trimester when hearing becomes functional, and newborns can distinguish and even prefer their native tongue soon after birth. So it just highlights that critical learning window from prenatal development all the way through to age 3. So this document is free to download on our website should you wish, in the resources we recommend section. I'm just going to go through it really briefly. So the B is for being face to face. So like you saw the lady in the clip, getting down to their level, making eye contact. Your face helps them learn and connect and builds foundations for communication and social understanding. The R is for respond and reflect. So when children express themselves, it's just responding with interest, even if they're like talking gobbledygook. So reflecting their actions builds trust and language networks in the brain, as we looked at in those studies. I is for interact through play. And so playful interactions from peekaboo to building towers help children practice the skills in just fun, different ways, which boosts development across many different brain areas. G is give time to talk. So pausing during conversations to give children space to think and to respond. This shows that you're listening and drives that language growth. H is for hold often. So cuddles and close physical contact helps children feel safe. That gentle touch releases bonding hormones and lowers stress, which supports emotional security. And then T is for tune in. So we follow the child's lead and focus on what interests them. That shared attention boosts vocabulary, memory, and emotional connection. So that was just a whistle-stop tour of that. And then I've got a nice fact there, just that you read. So we're just going to now look at these skills that you can see here. So understanding how children learn literacy skills, start with knowing the difference between these two terms that you can see on the screen. So speaking, for example, is a biologically primary skill. So our brains are hardwired to learn language. We've actually got built-in systems for noticing sounds, processing words, and picking up patterns in speech. As a species, we've been speaking using complex language for more than 250,000 years. So in that time, the brain has had time to evolve to facilitate speaking. Children typically don't need formal instruction to learn to talk as long as they're in language-rich environments, so chatting with parents, peers, friends, or even themselves, these systems develop naturally. Put simply, talking comes naturally. However, the biologically secondary skills are the cultural inventions like reading, writing, maths. Our brain isn't pre-wired for these. They've got to be taught explicitly. And as I said, children naturally learn to speak by hearing and engaging with others. Reading is completely different. We don't have a reading instinct. Writing systems, and therefore reading, emerged relatively recently in human history, around sort of 5,000 years ago. So this is a very short time in evolutionary terms. So we haven't developed the biological, the innate biological capability to read just naturally yet. So most children won't just learn to read by being around books, if only. So they need that systematic, explicit instruction, such as phonics teaching, that links the letters to sounds. So understanding the difference really helps us as educators to recognise the need to build on those primary skills, like oral language, to support the rest of literacy. And it also highlights the importance of the explicit, systematic instruction of those secondary skills, especially for things like reading and writing. So, as I've said, children come to all the other aspects of literacy ready equipped, mostly, with their oral language. It's a biologically primary skill. So this diagram just illustrates how language is central to all of the other literacy skills, as you can see here. So oral language encompasses both listening, so our receptive language, our ability to understand spoken language, and speaking, so expressive language, and that's our ability to convey our thoughts, our ideas, our meaning through speech. And if we look at the skills branching out, first one at the top is phonemic awareness. So that's our ability to understand and manipulate sounds. And this starts with hearing and playing with the sounds in spoken words. Phonics and spelling. This involves connecting these sounds to written symbols, a process built directly on a child's oral awareness of sounds. The next is vocabulary and morphology. So word meanings, word parts are acquired and understood first through spoken language and conversation. Grammar and syntax there. So that's sentence structure, word order, tenses are essential for both spoken and written communication, and they're developed initially by hearing and practicing them orally. We then move on to text comprehension. So that's our understanding of both spoken and written language relies heavily on our oral comprehension skills. And then finally, one of the hardest things we ask children to do is that written expression, that translating our thoughts into structured writing. And that's the accumulation of being able to organise and express those thoughts clearly through our oral language first. So in essence, a rich and vibrant oral language environment forms the bedrock upon which, all of the skills for literacy are built. And then I'll just let you read this. So just to paraphrase Pam Snow, she says that oral language is remarkable but also fragile. So as we looked at, it's biologically primary, so it's hardwired, yet it needs intentional support to thrive. Oral language is a paradox, so it's natural for us as humans, but yet it's dependent on nurture for it to reach its full potential. So before we sort of delve into the Strive for Five framework, we're just going to dip into 6 principles of early language development, and these do underpin the framework. So principle one is that children learn the words they hear most, as I'm sure that some of you have found out, either for better or for worse. So frequent exposure to spoken language boosts vocabulary and grammar development. So the more language children hear, the more opportunity they have to process and learn from it. Principle two is that they learn words best in interactive, responsive settings. So those back and forth responsive conversations, not just that passive listening, are essential. Social interactions give children meaningful contingent feedback, which fuels learning far more than anything that they hear or overhear or hear from a screen. And then principle three is that children learn words for things and events that interest them. They learn best when adults talk about what they are already focused on. Labeling and talking about a child's current focus supports attention, motivation, and learning. Principle four, that they learn words in context. So language is much easier to understand and remember when it's connected to real life experiences or familiar routines. So embedding vocabulary that we want them to learn in play, storytelling, everyday activities helps them to understand and remember and then use those new words. Principle five is that they learn best when vocabulary and grammar go together. So they support one another, vocabulary and grammar. They're an integrated system. So rich sentence models and varied language input helps children learn not just words, but how to use them in like a grammatically correct and expressive way. And then the last principle is that they need positive, affirming language environments. So conversations that are warm, encouraging, open-ended, these truly support more learning than talk that's negative or overly directive. So encouraging language such as tell me more or what do you think builds confidence and strengthens conversation skills. It invites children to participate and explore. Whereas in contrast, prohibitions, which is language that limits or forbids or shuts down a child's actions or expressions. So when we may answer with don't do that or no, that can stifle their language use and shut down opportunities for learning and expression. And then just got a pause point here for you to read, pause and reflect for a moment before we go into looking at Strive for 5. Right, hopefully that set the scene. And then just to recap, the EF recommend the two strategies that you can see there. And Strive for 5 directly delivers both those strategies. It is the back and forth conversation and it inherently involves scaffolds because as we're doing it, we're providing tailored support across the 5 turns to help children succeed in language tasks. And children, as we've discovered, learn language by hearing language in use from adults, from peers, songs, books, TV, games. Shared reading especially is rocket fuel. So while hearing that rich language is essential, practicing is equally vital. So sometimes there's an imbalance, isn't there? Sometimes we talk to or at children rather than with them. So it's about ensuring that children are not just hearing language, but actively doing language and using it. And that's where Strive for 5 comes in. It's super powerful and it really is very simple. It's all about having at least five back or forth serve and returns with a child. If you haven't already received the booklet from the Early Years Stronger Practice Hub, it is on our website. So David Dickinson, not the antiques guy, but an educational researcher, coined the term Strive for 5 back in 2003. So it's also been promoted by Hadley et al. There in 2020, and then most recently by Sonia Cabell and Co. in 2024. So it has been around a while, and it certainly isn't my invention. I've just packed it up into a free and hopefully useful guide for you. So it really is such a simple thing. It doesn't require huge changes. It's just an enhancement of what you're already doing in your setting. It's a bake through, not a sort of sprinkle on top. So it's something that we're doing all the time with our children. It's just part and parcel of our practice. It drenches children in language so that every interaction matters. So research points out that a common challenge in settings is that adults often don't give children enough time to think before they respond to a question. So here's what tends to happen. So we ask a question. If a child doesn't answer it straight away, we might quickly rephrase the question, or we might go to another child and ask another child the question, or we might even answer it for them ourselves. So this behaviour often leads to three-turn conversation pattern called IRE, so initiate, respond, evaluate. The problem with this pattern is that it keeps the conversation short and heavily focused on the adult talking rather than the child. So it limits the child's opportunity to practice deeper thinking, elaborate on ideas, or really develop their language skills. So in essence, it cuts off potential for rich extended learning conversations. So just a pause point now, and I just invite you to think back over the past few days. How often did you have a conversation with a child that did not follow the typical initiate, respond, evaluate pattern? Which children do you talk with the most? Is it the quiet ones or the confident talkers? Which children sometimes get overlooked or excluded in conversations, and why do you think that is? And then what prevents you from having extended conversations with children if that's the case? So just a few moments to pause and reflect. So strive for five, when we're using it, should prioritise those children who need the most support to develop their language initially. So support can be embedded through increased adult attention, meaningful conversations about the things that we want children to be thinking hard about, conversations to develop social skills, and targeted scaffolding. So ensuring that we've got that inclusive and effective learning. So strive for five is incredibly effective for our youngest learners, but it's also not limited just to early years. So let's look at a more successful conversation now. So the one in green. This time in turn 3, the adult evaluates the response and chooses to recast to demonstrate the grammatical accuracy and challenges the child to elaborate. So in the final turn, the adult wraps up the exchange and kind of summarizes the conversation. So obviously there might be legs in continuing this conversation beyond the 5 turns. So I'll just give you a little moment to compare, like play spot the difference with the good in the bad example. So it's just that difference of being language drenched or language parched. So in the successful interaction, the child hears more language, uses more language, and it's just a simple casual exchange that keeps the conversation going. And then that's the example from the guide. You can see in the successful side, the adult builds on the answer to introduce the word shelter and then asks another open question. And then on the final turn, they reinforce core vocabulary like protect and predator and enhances the child's understanding. So I'm sure we've all experienced those moments where we ask a question, receive that brief response, and then move on. And that stops the conversation dead, doesn't it, with a well done or something like that. But if we want to develop children's language and thinking, it's about extending those exchanges. So this is where strive for 5. And as we said, it's at least 5 conversational turns. So turn 1 is where the adult prompts or initiates the discussion. So usually by posing a question. Turn 2 is the response from the child. And then turn 3 is the pivotal point, because this is where the adult sort of evaluates and then determines whether they're going to either support to guide the children's understanding or to challenge the child's thinking. So turn three shapes the direction of the interaction. So we ask a follow-up question that encourages deeper thinking and elicits more language. And what's recommended is that it's on the same topic. It's important not to stray onto another topic and go off on a different tangent because that promotes richer language use and actually demonstrates to the child that you're genuinely interested in their ideas. So staying engaged in their responses and continuing the dialogue builds that trust and reinforces that their thoughts are valued. So the third turn absolutely depends on the child's response. So the adult needs to evaluate the child's turn two response, and then they need to consider their next move. So am I going to support or am I going to challenge them? So after turn two, you might decide to support, and one method is to recast. So this is simply where you rephrase or remodel the response to reinforce grammar and vocabulary. So the purpose is to gently correct and model richer language use without discouraging the child. We might choose to recast when the child's meaning is clear, but their grammar or vocabulary needs sort of remodeling. So in this example that you can see on the screen, the adult uses echo and enhance to recast what the child's saying. So a tip here is to just keep the flow natural, to try and repeat and remodel without directly correcting. So that's recast. Blank is another support option. So this means that you intentionally leave a sentence unfinished. So you invite the child to complete the thought. So this technique helps children to develop expressive language and comprehension by just giving them that gentle prompt to finish what they're saying or thinking. So we might use this when a child is close to the right answer or idea, but just needs a subtle cue or clue to complete their thought. And then a tip is just to use your tone of voice and body language to encourage them to sort of fill that gap. So if their answer is sort of okay, it's spot on, you might sort of challenge them and get them to elaborate. So this is where you prompt them to add more detail or use specific vocabulary, maybe words that you've been teaching them. So the purpose here is to sort of encourage that deeper expression, getting more information. So that's an example that you can see down the side. And then again, if their answer is solid, you might wish to challenge with extend. So the purpose of extend is to stretch children's thinking by prompting them to explore ideas more deeply. So based on their response in turn two, we will choose one of the diet prompts. And diet is an acronym that stands for the things that you can see there on the screen. So describe, this is where we guide children to incorporate sensory details and comparisons when describing objects, events or experiences. So we're encouraging them to observe closely and express similarities and differences in their own words. When we choose infer, we encourage them to make predictions, express feelings, share opinions, all supported by evidence or their own personal experiences. Explain is when we encourage them to reason and justify, exploring causes and effects and solutions, prompting them to think about why or how something's happened. And then tell is when we help children to sort of name, recall, or sequence events or details. So we can use prompts to guide storytelling or explanations or recounts of things. So that's diet, and we'll just dig into it a bit more. So describe, we can use this if a child gives a brief or basic sort of label to something, and we want to enrich their vocabulary and observation skills. So we might prompt them to add sensory detail. You know, what does it look like, smell like, feel like, or make comparisons with other things. So this builds expressive vocabulary, it supports attention to detail and develops that early descriptive language skills. Then infer. So here we really want them to connect with what they already know, their own feelings and opinions, and like previous knowledge and experiences. So we can use this when a child shares a surface level idea and that you want to stretch their thinking beyond what's visible or obvious. So we can ask them questions like, what do you think? What might happen next? Or how do you know? So this develops critical thinking, empathy, and reading between the lines. And then explain. So we can use this when a child talks about a problem or a choice, and you want to unpack their thinking process or get them to understand the cause and effect. So we're encouraging reasoning with things like, how did that happen? Or what caused that? What could we do next time? So this supports logical thinking, problem solving, and that early scientific thinking. And then another explain example to show how to develop problem solving and reasoning skills. And then tell. So this we can use when a child mentions something they did and you want to build their narrative and sequencing skills. So we might ask them to retell something in order, to name the people or things that were involved, or to explain steps in a routine or a game or something like that. And this develops storytelling, their memory, their concept of time, and forms the foundations for written recounts later on. So then we come to turn 4. So hopefully, after your prompt in turn 3, the child will respond again to your support or challenge. And then turn 5, the adult wraps it up by modeling advanced vocabulary or summarizing the key ideas. Or, as I've said, if there's real merit, continuing the conversation. So we might then treat turn 5 like turn 3 and evaluate their turn 4 and, either support or challenge to continue the conversation. And then on our website, there's that document, and it isn't rocket science, but hopefully some helpful ideas to spark a strife for 5. And then I've just got a few examples just to flash up using some of those examples. So this is the very random puppet example. And at turn 3, the adult chooses elaborate. And then the mystery bag example, and this time at turn 3, the adult chooses to extend and then goes with the describe part of that. And then last one, a treasure hunt example, and then turn 3 is extend and infer. And you can just see the difference, the amount of language after that third turn. Okay, hopefully that was long enough. But ultimately it comes down to this. So fundamentally, kids need to have something interesting to talk about. That's why books, pictures, the environment are, things that they're interested in are really great talking points. So for Strive to 5 to work, you've got to have something substantial to discuss and explore. And also that children really do need that wait time. So making sure that we leave think or wait time is really important. So as I said before, if a child doesn't answer instantly, we might be tempted then to quickly ask someone else or, answer it for them. But research has shown that we fire questions out and only wait around 1.5 seconds before we expect a reply, where children need at least 3 seconds of thinking time, and 3 seconds is optimal. So when we pause for those 3 seconds or more, it allows children to process information, organize their responses, and improve the sort of logic and factual content of their answers. So it's in the silence, so those 3 seconds of wait time, that the thinking occurs. And then I've just got a Strive for 5 sort of example in a group context. So imagine it's a reception class. So the children are sitting on the carpet. They might have done some, chatting in partners. And then the adult might choose to have a Strive for 5 with 2 children. So first of all, Sophia, who you can see on the screen, that's the conversation. And then the adult then might bounce the question onto Alex to sort of further the dialogue. And as you're sort of looking at that, I hope you can see how the benefits might then extend beyond both Alex and Sophia to the others in the group. So the wait time that you can see incorporated there before selecting a pupil to answer or a child to answer ensures that everybody on the carpet is thinking hard about what you want them to think hard about. And then children nearby benefit from that exposure to advanced vocabulary, reasoning, the conversational patterns, that language-rich environment. So they can all learn from those other interactions, even if they're not directly involved. But obviously there's a limit within reason. We wouldn't want to hold a strive for 5 with every child because that would be tedious and it would lead to passivity. So we can strive for 5 at any time of the day. All adults in the setting can be striving for 5 with children, and we can get parents involved too. And we're going to look at that next. So it really is, I hope you can see, it's just a small shift in what we're doing that can make a big difference. And sometimes it is those smallest changes in our approach that can lead to the biggest improvements. So just one extra question, a deeper conversation, a slight adjustment can spark new insights and build stronger connections and help children to reach their full potential. So it's just about making all those little moments count. And then caregivers. Caregivers and parents can profoundly boost children's language by using Strive for 5 at home. So it complements what you're doing in your setting and actually adds benefit. So ensuring parents and carers that deeply connect with the idea that talking is teaching, at home, and that's really important. So supporting caregivers by providing concrete talk tasks, simple materials, they're often eager to help, but need actionable ideas that fit the busy routines at home. So sharing resources like those conversation starters that you can see there, that can be used in everyday moments, playtimes, meal times, car journeys, is key. So creating a positive, trusting relationship between us and the caregivers is paramount. So when educators initiate these connections, caregivers are actually more likely to engage because they view us as trusted partners, ensuring a powerful home setting partnership for the child's learning. And then just as we close down, those serve and return interactions are vital, not just for language, but for social and emotional learning as well, and for building relationships in the setting. It supports relationships and a sense of belonging, and it fosters strong connections sort of in all aspects of their life. In the guide, I'm not going to go into it in any detail, but the goal is for language and literacy and knowledge, but it's also for building relationships. And there are some practical tips at the back of the guide just to get started. But key point is that third turn in a strive for 5 is that pivotal point. And the more you strive for 5, the more natural it actually becomes. And then just because I love literacy, reading with children is rocket fuel for supercharging language and building relationships. So interactive reading is one of the ways to develop early literacy and communication and language. And it appears, as you can see there, in both of the key themes on the evidence store. It's also brilliant for developing PSED as well. So on our website is a guide for interactive reading too. And then 2 free webinars that are on our YouTube channel, and they both use interactive reading. So one goes through that Peer and Clear framework when reading with children, and then the other's all about using books and stories to develop PSED. And then just as we wind down, I just want to end again on another really short video. So it's never too early to introduce shared reading. So in an infant's earliest months, the goal about shared reading isn't about them actually engaging with the text or the illustration. Instead, reading with the baby is a social activity. It fosters bonding, exposes them to rich vocabulary. So if a baby focuses on a reader's face rather than the book, this is actually immensely beneficial. The child is attuned to the sounds and the mouth movement. So even if they don't glance at the book, they're absorbing the experiencing, anticipating sounds, and to basically delighting in the interaction. So over time, children will naturally attune to the book's mechanics, so the illustrations and then eventually the written words. But in the early days, simply sharing the experience is profoundly beneficial for developing brains. So it truly is never too early. So interactive reading, as you can see, when you watch the really short video clip, it's less than half a minute. Reading does all of those things.
It keeps saying, ah, you say, la, la, la. No, no, you say that isn't right. Pigs say, all day and night. My master just snort and stuff, and then I have to go, ruff, ruff, ruff.
So it's just a joyful experience. So I hope this session has been useful, and all of the resources that go alongside it as well. The Early Years Stronger Practice Hub and myself really do value your feedback. We like to know what we're doing well, what we can do better. It also gives us the opportunity in the future to sort of say what you'd like more of. So there's a QR code, please, if you don't mind scanning that and filling in the feedback form. And I've also popped the link in the chat as well. So we really would appreciate if you could fill that in. And then all of our contact details are there. So that's our website at the top where all of the free resources are, and the YouTube channel to access all the video clips. But nothing left to say, but I'll stop the recording now for questions. And if you haven't got any, thank you very much for coming, and I hope it was useful.